a straitjacket for Hong Kong. But I can understand why small government, big market is more or less like a dogma in Hong Kong. You just remember 2 years ago, 2006, September, after an economic summit in Hong Kong, when the chief executive came out to meet the media and said, well, in fact, for the government, positive interventionism is no longer the guiding principle. Now, he was actually speaking the truth. That is what was the case. And he was blasted by some economists, by some commentators, by some legislators, who said, why are you doing away with positive non-interventionism? So you may argue that in the mainstream, somehow, there is this preference for small government. But if you read the policy address, particularly the last few pages, when it comes to Mr. Cheung's sharing of his core values, so-called core values with the community, actually he does say that, well, he does say that the market is not omnipresent. I think that's exactly what he said. He said the market is not omnipotent. Interventionism is not necessarily an evil. So he's trying to redefine the relationship between the market and government. Of course, he's doing this in much the same way as many government leaders nowadays are doing. But just remember, he used to be a close follower of the late Philip Haddon Cave, one of the former financial secretaries of Hong Kong, who came up with the term positive non-interventionism. Now, whether it's Joseph Yam, Donald Cheung, they were brought up in the Haddon Cave days. Now, for people of that kind of background to come around to say, well, there is a more larger role, relatively larger role for government to play, I think that is something that we should pay attention to. He said that he cares about core values. Now, people can disagree with the kind of core values that Mr. Cheung may embrace. I think that's entirely up for the community to discuss. But for core values to be formally recognized in the policy address in such a high profile, I think that's something worth noticing. Because at least Mr. Cheung has accepted the currency, if not the full substance of what people are talking about in terms of core values. And I think that's important. He talked about the third way. Now, of course, for academics who have been following the third way discourse, the third way probably by now has come to the end of the discussion, because somehow it's no longer a very fashionable way of talking about the latest developments. But still, I mean, Mr. Cheung is trying to argue that, well, he doesn't subscribe to a strict left and right. Now, of course, left and right in the Hong Kong context are different from left and right in other societies. And yet, he was criticized, if I may quote one of the commentators. Now, I find that criticism particularly amazing. I think it's in Ming Pao. The argument of the writer is, well, Mr. Cheung is talking about the third way. When Mr. Chan Shui-bian gave an address at LSE in front of Anthony Giddens, Mr. Chen also subscribed the third way. So what is Mr. Cheung trying to do? Now, that is a very sort of conspiracy theory kind of assessment of what the chief executive has to say. I mean, you can criticize him for what he has not said. You can challenge him on the third way. You can say, well, third way is outdated. Why don't you come up with something else? But trying to compare the third way in this manner, I think it's quite, I don't know what is behind that particular commentator. But the reason why I want to use that example is a few years ago, 2004, when some of us, Albert, myself, and some others, when we initiated a Hong Kong core values declaration. And I remember vividly the Asia Week, the Chinese Asia Week, So there was this article who said, if you take our core values declaration to Taiwan, the argument was, Chen Shui-bian will sign it. Lui Shaolin will sign it, the vice president. So the core values declaration is a kind of statement trying to de-Sinerize Hong Kong, 去中國化. That was the implication of the article. So what I'm trying to do is, okay, what Mr. Cheung has said in his policy address probably has not met a lot of demands from the community. People would like him to go an extra mile, extra 2 miles, but can we sort of detect some shift, which is important? And I would argue that this is exactly what the government is, the kind of situation where the government now is in. And when I prepared for this forum, I put down, when I wrote something, some points for this forum, I put down here in Chinese. I said, how should we read the policy address? And I put down 4 points, 4 main points. I said, this is, in Chinese is 配位, okay, at the crossroads between government and the market. Okay? So, but basically, I think Hong Kong is moving into a situation where the government has to get out of its previous dogma and to accept that the government has a role to play. But in my view, it's not just about intervention or not intervention. It's about good intervention or bad intervention. But my own worry is that because for a long time we have a government which has espoused a non-interventionist ideology. So my worry is, does the government possess enough instruments, capacity, or foresight for intervention if intervention is necessary? So that is the question. Secondly, at the crossroads of politics and administration. And I will use the OH allowance as example. Now, if the government just respond to the politics, then it's quite simple. We just accept an increase in the OH allowance. But I think the government still, because this is a government which is largely made up of administrators, civil servants in the past, or people who come from a civil service background. And for a long time, policy change in Hong Kong, social reforms in Hong Kong have been driven by fiscal considerations rather than value, ideological, or even political considerations. But Hong Kong has become increasingly political. Now, political here is not a negative term. So the question is, how do you judge? How do you trade off? How do you balance the various concerns? And of course, yes, if you feel that increasing the OH entitlement will give rise to a lot of financial burden, then are you willing to leave a burden to next generation? But unfortunately, in politics, every decision made by any current government will have some implication for the next government or the next generation. And we can't really avoid that from happening. So I think you have to really decide whether you have to go all the way in terms of having a political response. The third point, at the crossroads of the so-called executive-led regime and executive-legislative cooperation. I think the kind of executive-led doctrine, which was the key doctrine of the colonial era.